Stories from people who were taken hostage or close to it. My own experience was more of a kidnapping than a hostage situation. My parents divorced when I was 6, and a few years later, my dad moved across the country to California. By the time I was 12, the plan was that he'd fly to Michigan, then take my sister 13 at the time and me back with him for a week, before returning us home. The trip was awful. He was a terrible parent. One example, he dragged us to Reno, Nevada, left us at a buffet, and disappeared with his new wife to gamble all night. When it was time to return, he tried to convince us to stay. We refused, and he flat out told us, "Too bad," and refused to take us to the airport. I distracted him while my sister called our mom. Within an hour, a cab pulled up outside. My dad tried to chase it off, but apparently, my mom and other relatives had made it very clear over the phone that the driver wasn't allowed to leave without us. To this day, I don't know how they even managed to pay for it. Probably a prepaid credit card over the phone. Which felt risky back in the 90s. We got in the cab, then flew back to Michigan alone with a connecting flight. Our uncle met us at the airport at 5 in the morning. I'm still amazed we made it back. Shout out to the Northwest Airlines crew. One flight attendant sat with us through severe turbulence, and another employee helped us when we nearly missed our connection. Another story. I once had a gun pointed at my head during a bank robbery. The teller was too slow for the robber's liking, and for a terrifying moment, I was the target. Strangely, I felt nothing, just a quiet acceptance that, if I died, it would at least be quick. Only hours later did the reality hit me, and I broke down. I had panic attacks for a few months afterward, but no long-term PTSD. These days, I'm fine with it, and even use the story as a dark icebreaker. In college, I became known as the bank robbery girl until graduation. My father, in São Paulo, Brazil, once got kidnapped while driving his truck. A gang hijacked his vehicle, rode with him all day, and stole his cargo. Ironically, it was just candy. They even stopped for coffee while holding him. He feared for his life, but eventually, they released him and returned the truck. Months later, police arrested some suspects and asked him to identify them, but he refused to get involved. Later we learned a rival candy company had orchestrated the whole thing. Brazil is no place for amateurs. Another time, I reported someone for sexual assault, and in retaliation, he kidnapped me. For 7 hours, I was tied up in his car as he drove aimlessly. It was surreal, thinking I might die on a bright sunny day while strangers outside went about their lives. By midnight, he'd become more unhinged and admitted he had 2 options: let me go and face prison, or keep me in the mountains for a few days while he figured things out. I knew if he chose the second option, I was done for. Out of desperation, I acted my way out. I convinced him to call a mutual friend, my ex-boyfriend, who happened to be on a date. My ex calmly talked him down, got him to untie me, and escorted him to a hospital where guards eventually intervened. My ex basically saved my life. To this day, I joke that this is why you should always stay on civil terms with your exes. Another story. When I was a baby, my biological father kidnapped me. Angry that my mother had left him, he broke into her apartment, took me from my crib, and threatened to kill me if anyone tried to stop him. His own parents eventually called the police. They sneaked me away from him while he was passed out drunk and rushed me to the hospital. I still have scars from where he cut me for crying. He was arrested, served time, remarried, and later abused his new wife's children before being arrested again. I have no memory of it, thankfully. When my dad was about 18 and working at a garden center in Chicago, he was closing up one night when a man pulled a gun and demanded the cash register. My dad handed over about $60, the only money in the drawer. What the robber didn't know was that my dad already had the real earnings $3,000 hidden in his jacket, ready to deliver to the owner's house. The thief ran off with $60, none the wiser. As my dad says, luck meets preparation. Another case, while grocery shopping in London. My sister had a knife pressed against her throat by a desperate junkie demanding the cashier open the till. She pretended to faint, slipped away, and the security guard pinned the guy down until police arrived. She started applying for jobs outside London the very next day. When I was 8, my aunt and uncle kept me locked in their house because they didn't approve of my mom's lifestyle. They even pressured their kids into helping. Meanwhile, my mother was calling the police, trying to get me back. I cried my eyes out. It happened twice. In preschool, I argued with my babysitter and stormed into the backyard. An upstairs neighbor lured me inside, chatted while she painted, and then refused to let me leave. She was mentally unstable and wouldn't return me even when police showed up. I only remember crying on the staircase, reaching for the officers as they tried to talk her down. When I was 18, working at Hollywood Video, I was robbed at gunpoint. It was 15 minutes before closing, and only the assistant manager and I were there. A masked man entered, aimed what looked like a massive pistol, and forced her to empty the register. He held the gun an inch from my face while she handed over $50. Then he left. The aftermath was almost worse. The police treated me like a suspect, questioning me with hostility. They even doubted my description of the robber and his weapon. Despite my clear view, I remember being interrogated once, and it felt like I was the criminal. They kept pressing me, asking how I knew so much about firearms. Eventually, they requested that I come down to the police station to give a statement. By then, I had already called my dad, and he showed up to go with me. At the station, they placed me in what looked like an interrogation room. Initially, they refused to let my dad in, but I insisted that I wanted him there. They finally gave in and allowed him inside. The detective then started questioning me so aggressively it felt like I was the suspect in the robbery. My dad had to intervene, asking if I was being accused, arrested, or detained. The answer to all three was no. So, my dad stood up and said we were leaving, and we did. Another time, I found out years later that my father had actually tried to kill me and my siblings when I was around 5 years old. At that point, I had 2 older brothers, ages 7 and 9, and 2 younger sisters who weren't in school yet. My dad had recently been thrown out of the house by my mom because of his abuse. One day, he picked us up from our primary school and took us for what seemed like a simple walk by the river. As a kid, I thought it was fun and even kept it as a pleasant memory. But as an adult, I learned the horrifying truth: he brought us there intending to drown us as revenge. It took years of my mother convincing him not to go through with it, and countless more years of abuse before it finally ended. That revelation shook me to my core. At a previous job, one of my coworkers was actually kidnapped in Mexico by MS-13. Our company sometimes sent teams there, and whenever they traveled, they usually had armed guards escorting them in caravans. Thankfully, I never had to go. But this coworker made the mistake of leaving the hotel on his own. He was grabbed, taken to a remote shack, and held while gang members went through his belongings. They found his employer's contact information and demanded ransom. Somehow, he managed to escape and ran to a gas station, where the attendant contacted the federal police. He was taken to safety and eventually escorted back across the border. I also experienced what almost turned into a kidnapping. One Christmas, my brother and I had spent the morning at our dad's, and our grandmother was supposed to drive us to our mom's house. But instead of heading in the right direction, she drove toward the Canadian border. My brother and I knew the route well, and kept telling her she was going the wrong way, but she ignored us. For nearly an hour, we drove in the wrong direction. We didn't have cell phones back then, so we were stuck in silence. She only realized her mistake when she saw the border crossing signs. She turned back, but it added hours to the trip. What should have been a 1-hour drive turned into over 4 hours. When we finally arrived, a police car was parked in our mom's driveway. She had been panicked, worried we'd gotten into an accident or worse. The police even suspected kidnapping, since we lived so close to the border. It turned out to be the first sign of my grandmother's dementia, which worsened quickly. Within 2 years, she had passed away. Back in the mid-90s, I was at a huge public event, sitting near the front of an arena. I noticed a man who looked nervous and was dressed very differently from everyone else. At first, I thought nothing of it. But when the featured speaker came on stage, this man suddenly rushed the podium, claiming he had explosives in a briefcase. He shouted bizarre demands and declared no one was leaving until they were met. He was distracted by the crowd's reaction, giving another audience member a chance to spray him with mace. Security and others jumped on him, beating him down before hauling him away. The speaker, surprisingly, carried on like nothing had happened. Later, the media exaggerated the story so much that it hardly resembled reality. It was surreal to watch the event I had personally witnessed become twisted into near fiction. Sadly, I've been held hostage more than once in my life. The first time was when I was only 5. After my mom told my dad she was leaving him, he held the entire family at shotgun point in the living room for about 24 hours before he eventually fell asleep. The second time was with a predator who used to rent me out as a child. He feared I might expose him, so he held me in his living room, again at gunpoint, for an entire day while raging in a manic state. The third time was only a few years ago. An assassin possibly hired by either my childhood abuser or my ex-wife's father held me at gunpoint at a campsite and demanded I get in his truck. I refused, waited for an opening, and managed to escape. These experiences left me with lifelong PTSD. Another frightening moment happened at a party. A girl invited me back to her place, and although I felt uneasy, I went along. Her place was messy, with boxes and packaging everywhere. When she took me to her room, I saw a man in his underwear lying in her bed. I immediately tried to leave, but the front door was locked with a keyed lock from the inside. The man accused me of stealing his drugs and pointed an assault rifle at me. I was terrified. He interrogated me for next story. Does being sort of kidnapped count? When I was very young, around 4 years old, I spent a day at my father's house. That was rare enough since he didn't see me much, and it wasn't supposed to be an overnight visit. When my mother came to pick me up, my father denied that I was even there. He wouldn't let her in, insisting he didn't know where I was. Eventually, the police were called, and I was allowed to leave with my mom. No charges were pressed because it was treated as a custody dispute. My only memory of that night is finger painting in the back of the house with, I think, my father's wife. I wasn't allowed to leave that part of the house, but the finger painting stuck in my mind because it was the only time I ever did it. Next story. When I was about 20, I went through a phase of casual hookups and met a guy online. We hung out a few times. It was strictly physical, though sometimes we grabbed food and I'd stay over. In his own way, he was oddly respectful. He was fresh out of a bad relationship and didn't want anything serious, and I appreciated his honesty. One night, after we slept together, I passed out. He got a call for work and told me I could just stay and sleep. I later woke up, half asleep, thinking he'd come back, but instead, someone else entered the room. At first, I only saw a big parka, and I thought, that's not him. When the hood came down, I realized it was a woman. She didn't look shocked to see me, which was strange, but in my groggy state, I didn't think much of it. She gave the impression she was another fling of his. I even tried to joke, guess he really gets around, huh? I said I'd clean up and leave, but when I came out of the bathroom, the situation had completely changed. I had been wearing one of his t-shirts, and she was cutting up my actual shirt and bra with a steak knife. In an eerily calm voice, she explained that I had been sleeping with her husband and that I needed to wait until he came home to sort it out. I sat frozen for hours, debating my options. Sometimes, I thought about rushing her, but I knew I wasn't strong enough to win. She didn't attack me directly, but she sat there half the time, watching me while shifting the knife between her hands. I kept thinking, I'll never see my mom again. When she heard a car pull into the driveway, she panicked and left me alone in the bedroom. It wasn't him, it was just another car turning around. That gave me a chance. I climbed out the window into the snow, wearing only my underwear because she had made me take off the borrowed t-shirt. I banged on a neighbor's door until they let me in. She was gone by the time police arrived. Needless to say, I stopped casual hookups after that. No judgment toward others, but I can't sleep with people I don't fully trust anymore. Next story. When I was 17, after a fight with my mom, I ran away and met a 26-year-old man who picked me up. The moment I stepped into his room, I was trapped there for 3 months. I never left that room. I had to use the cat's litter box to pee and ate only what he brought home. No internet. No phone, no school, no showers, no toothbrush. I didn't speak to my friends or my mom. My daily life was wake up, get beaten, get assaulted, eat cold hummus. Repeat. I won't go into more detail. But I'll just say it's a miracle I got out alive. That period changed everything for me. Next story. A few years ago, I was almost taken again. I ordered an Uber, but the driver didn't match the photo. He confirmed the name, so I got in. But he never started the ride on the app. He acted confused, kept asking to see my phone, then told me he'd just take me for free without the app. Huge red flag. I demanded he pull into a parking lot, and that's when I realized the child locks were on. I screamed until he finally let me out. I ran into a store, and for 15 minutes, he sat in the lot, staring at the door. That was the most terrified I've ever been. Next story. I work in physical therapy at a regional hospital. One patient, a well-known man in the community, had gone off his psych meds due to conflicts with his heart medication. He grew increasingly paranoid and started accusing staff of absurd crimes. When I entered for a session, he calmly asked me to close the door because of hallway noise. The moment I did, he grabbed his jugular linea central line into his neckhand, threatened to rip it out unless I listened to his accusations. He wouldn't let me leave or use the phone. Any movement made him yell and tug at his neck. So I listened quietly to his rants for about 20 minutes. Eventually, I convinced him that filing a police report was the best way to handle it. He agreed, so I called the hospital police and carefully told them to come to his room immediately to take his statement. They arrived, got him into a safe position, and I left to write a long incident report. Next story. My brothers and I were once reported as hostages by my stepdad's friend's ex-wife. She was bitter from their divorce and called the cops, saying he and my stepdad were holding us hostage. Out of nowhere, a SWAT team surrounded our house with guns drawn. We peeked out the doorway as my stepdad and his friend walked out with their hands up. We waved to show we were okay. My stepdad got furious that the police had pointed guns at us kids, but eventually things calmed down when it was proven false. Shockingly, she tried it again months later, though that time they just sent a patrol car. Next story. Mine is smaller, but still scary. I was accused of stealing $50. My so-called friends decided to restrain me on the kitchen floor of a New York State Trooper's home. They held me there for hours, emptied my pockets, and even rubbed people's genitals on my stuff to humiliate me. Eventually, I tried to reason with them like a kidnap victim, begging them to let me go if I got money from an ATM. That seemed to jolt them into realizing how awful they were being. Later, the actual thief, Kyle, magically found the money in a room I had never even been in. I cut ties with nearly all of them after that night. Next story. According to court documents, I was kidnapped at 6 months old by my own mother, who suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. She put me in the trunk of a car, and my dad had to chase her into a police station. I have no memory of it, and my family doesn't like to talk about it. My mother passed away shortly after, but I eventually found the police report. That's how my father got full custody of me. After everything that happened, I don't really feel much. It was an incredibly rare situation for a father, especially one who wasn't divorced, to step in, but he did. Next story. During Scouts, another kid pressed a knife against my throat simply because he hated me. He thought it was edgy to threaten a younger Scout. When a counselor walked by, the kid let go, but after I reported him, he was expelled. He later threatened to kill me for ratting him out and even said he'd track down my house. Honestly, I almost wanted to hand him the address. We had enough firepower at home to defend ourselves. Next story. I once worked with one of the Iranian embassy hostages. He was among the black hostages who had been released early. He told me how terrifying it was, never knowing if each day would be their last. At one point, they were taken to a stadium, and some prisoners were let off the bus. They soon heard gunshots and cheering from inside. Everyone thought they were next, but later the men were returned to the group and locked back up. The uncertainty was unbearable. Next story. My mother, a lifelong drug addict, once pointed a loaded shotgun at me while stoned out of her mind. She screamed, "I wish you kids had never been born. You ruined my life." Even though I tried to stay defiant, it was terrifying. Someone that high could have pulled the trigger at any moment. That gun was in my face for what felt like forever. Next story. I once got dragged into a drug deal gone wrong. A friend told me we were just going to smoke weed with some old acquaintances. Instead, they asked if we knew anyone who bought pills. We set up a meeting with our supplier, who brought cash and weed. As soon as he got into the car with us, the driver sped off and the other guy pulled out a gun, demanding everything we had. I didn't have much besides my phone, but our dealer lost nearly $1,000. They drove us around, pressuring him to reveal his stash. When he didn't, they finally dumped us on a freeway exit ramp. I cut ties with everyone involved afterward. Trust your instincts. Kids, I knew something felt off and ignored it. Next story. My ex-girlfriend, who lived in a high-rise, was extremely unstable and paranoid. One night she tried to throw herself out the window. When I attempted to leave, I discovered she had locked the door with an extra deadbolt. She came at me with a knife, forcing me to kick and punch at the door. I broke both my hands in the process and later needed surgery. Realizing I couldn't break the door, I barricaded myself in a bedroom before eventually jumping out the window. I survived but shattered my ankle and injured my back. She's now in special care. I honestly wish her the best. Next story. In 4th grade, my school received a bomb threat. The callers threatened to blow up the campus if anyone left without permission. It turned out to be part of a string of hoaxes across the country. The bomb squad swept the school but, of course, found nothing. Next story. My great-grandfather fought on the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War. He and several others were loaded onto a guarded truck by the Nationalists. If he hadn't found a way to jump out and escape, he likely would have been executed. My dad thinks it might have actually been after the war, when Franco's men were sending people to concentration camps. Either way, it was a close call. Next story. While on vacation in Thailand, I went back to a Thai girl's shack in the woods. Things grew uncomfortable when her friend came home and went to sleep on the only bed. I said I was leaving, but she refused to let me go unless she showed me the way back to my hotel. The catch: she insisted I have sex with her first. In reality, she held me hostage. It was, without question, a sex crime, though some people would frame it differently. Next story. When I was 18, I sold cocaine for a dealer built like Rocky. Someone stole $1,600 from me, and the dealer demanded I repay it. When I went to meet him with what I had, his men handcuffed me, shoved me in a truck, and took me to the Santa Cruz Mountains. I was kept there for 2 days, chained to a railing, until my sister bailed me out. I endured beatings, pretended to collapse to avoid more, and left with a black eye. That was the last time I ever dealt drugs. Next story. At 15, I was trapped in an abusive relationship. I had to stay at their house constantly. I was only allowed to eat once a day, shower when they wanted to, and play only the video games they approved of. It was suffocating. Next story. In my early 20s, my boyfriend developed bipolar type 1 and schizophrenia. He self-medicated with drugs and alcohol, which made things worse. One night, he snapped, hurled a chair at me, grabbed a gun, and told me to call 911. He then locked himself in our room, threatening to shoot himself. When he realized I was on the phone with dispatchers, he stormed out, furious, and ordered me to hang up. I was terrified. The operator told me, "Never mind, please don't send anyone." But he replied, "Too bad." I said, "GU," because someone was already on the way. Since I had called from a landline, they knew exactly where I was. My ex grabbed me, shoved me into the car, and drove off, trying to avoid the police. Then, in a rare moment of clarity, he realized he was literally kidnapping me. So, he brought us back to the house where the police were waiting. He immediately told me what story I had to give them, that I was crazy. There was no gun, I was being dramatic, no chair was broken, yada yada. I don't think the officers fully believed me, but they didn't push it further. I really wish they had taken me to the station. Because even though they separated us, I was still inside the house, and didn't feel safe telling the truth. Cocaine really is a hell of a drug. Next story. My father, running low on drugs, decided to hold us hostage and announced that he wanted us all to die as a family. Luckily, my brother was still in school, and the delay gave time while my father opened the gas oven. The police got there first, thankfully, and he ended up in prison. I hardly remember any of it, but even as an adult, I can't stand being pinned down, even jokingly, or trapped with no way out. I think that's the lasting effect of that day. Another time, when I was just a baby or toddler, my father held me hostage. I was too young to remember, but my mother told me about it. I had been asleep, and he held a gun to my head inside a car while calling her to come outside. He was abusive and probably furious with her about something. This was back when we lived in Chicago. He was mixed up with gangs, drug dealing, and was heavily into cocaine. He wasn't doing well, and honestly, he's never been a good father. I don't bring it up with him, might just act like I don't know. Once though, when I was drunk, I called him and screamed at him about it. He didn't take it well and rang my mom, angry that she had told me. Truth is, I don't know what he's doing with his life now. He still lives in Chicago, but I don't. We barely talk, and when we do, it's only so he can send me money. He never supported me when I was a child. Another story. In college, I dated a wild girl who cheated on me constantly. Some of the guys she was involved with formed a weird group, and they decided I shouldn't be dating her but instead working like some kind of servant for them. They even threatened me with force and fake lawsuits to make it happen. After she and I broke up, I moved to the West Coast. Her other boyfriend's family, along with his group, harassed me for years up until 2018. They dragged my controlling family into it, stole my car, and labeled me as mentally unstable. They had me detained in a shady rehab for a month, then forced me back east against my will. I wasn't insane, I was just furious about being cheated on and having my car stolen. But they wanted to paint me as the villain to protect their reputations. The LA authorities went along with it, and I got screwed. My California friends were unreliable and didn't help.